Welcome to the Foundation series, where we explore startup compensation with top minds in the industry. You'll hear from heads of people, from founders and VCs on how to drive results through startup compensation strategies and practices. Let's dive into today's episode. Mark, welcome to the Foundation series. I appreciate you very much for being here. For those who don't know, Mark is my former leader from a stint at Oyster, which I look back on fondly. It was definitely one of the more insane periods of my career, but it was also one of the most dynamic, and I certainly took so many lessons from it. And I think in particular, you were absolutely up there as one of the best leaders that I've worked for. And I think I had a lot of lessons that I took from you as well. So I have that to be thankful for, which is part of the reason why I wanted to bring you on today and just unpack the whole topic of compensation, because I think there was a whole range of lessons from Oyster, but I think, you can add to that with your experience more broadly within startups. But I might take a second and just ask you, can you introduce yourself a little bit, your background,
Sure.
and talk a bit about your role at Oyster, please?
Yeah. So I am the Chief Operating Officer at Oyster HR, and I've been doing that for the last year and a bit. I've been at Oyster about 3 years. I actually joined as the Chief People Officer, and then we switched the title, I think, in month 3 to Chief Workplace Officer. I have a penchant for kind of screwy titles, and so I've had a bunch of bizarre titles. But the reason why I chose Chief Workplace Officer is I had a conglomerate of things that weren't HR only. It included IT and some other bits and pieces. And I felt like the right name for the thing would be Workplace. There's also an intentional irony. I mean, if you're a completely distributed company, you technically placeless. But as a company that both advocates for and serves a bunch of other customer companies that have a distributed global talent, I wanted to make a little bit of a statement, like we can still be a workplace. In fact, you have to be a workplace when you're distributed. You have to figure out how to make it feel like a place, even when it's not physical. So I was that, and then began my journey as the Chief Operating Officer here almost exactly a year ago. And as the Chief Operating Officer, I have a bunch of groups under me. I have our business operations group, our services and support groups, but I also have product, engineering, HR, legal, a couple of other pieces and parts, and I have wonderful humans. So it's a pleasure to be here with you. Nice to see you again. I'll be happy to use what I've learned over the years to bring some degree of intelligence to the questions. I mean, compensation is funny. I've watched your blossoming as an influencer and leader on the topic of global compensation. Not at all surprising that you are. And
I appreciate it.
It's funny because there's a tactical element to compensation, like what do we actually pay, how do we pay it, et cetera. But then there's a conceptual element. And my first career, or at least I was trained as a philosopher, as a pure social and ethical philosopher. And so the pieces of compensation that in some cases are under talked about often are the philosophical aspects, like what's the right thing to do and why is it the right thing to do? And it's harder in some ways because anybody can look online and say, like, what's the range of things that people are paid in job X? And then you have to ask yourself, is that the right thing to do here for us? And sometimes that's a pretty baffling, tough question because you have to think differently about the whole thing, right? So
and never, I think, were conversations around compensation more heated than in the context of Oyster being, I don't know how many countries your employees are spread now, but when I was there, it was 70, which was just, I know a lot of people are still shocked when I say that number, but the diversity, the complexity, the different schools of thought that people have based on where they live. There's so much from a philosophical perspective, and then it's also obviously a deeply emotional topic as well. And
Absolutely.
So there's an obligation there to get that as right for as many of the people that you want as part of your company as possible, which just makes it even more of a nuanced and fascinating topic.
Absolutely.
I'm really curious to sort of back it up a little bit to the COO piece. So you've kind of gone from this blended chief workplace officer, interesting department. I always remember how fascinated people were when I explained what workplace was, to an even more sort of insane blend of direct reports and functional areas reporting up to you. What was the motivation? You hear a lot of chief people officers, it's kind of that constant thing of, we don't have a seat at the table, we want to be more commercial, etc. What motivated you to want to take the step into arguably one of the more commercial roles in a business?
Yeah. I don't know. No, I'm kidding.
Don't know a year in.
No.
It wasn't what I thought it was.
That's right. This is going on the web, right? No, I'm kidding mostly. So for about a decade, I've been a startup HR executive, again, with various titles. But before that, I was the CEO of a Polish company. I mean, I guess it's all relative. It was 70 people, 12 million revenue. It was a professional services company, and our customers were HR execs. And so previous to being an internal HR executive, I was a commercial general executive of a consulting company. And I did that for a long time. So in some ways, I had a very unusual entry or a very unusual career arc when it comes to movement through the career. And
almost in reverse a little bit.
Yeah, in some bizarre ways. Yeah, like what why did I go from being CEO of a company to being a chief people officer? I was ready to learn to do something new, and I got the invite from the CEO of the company. His name is Matt Blumberg. He's a good friend. He's written a book on running startups, and he took a risk on me. And he asked me if I wanted to do it. And the reason why I said yes in part was because it was really different. It was really new. And I really knew how to run a professional services company, but I had no idea what it was like inside these startup things. And that was learning not only about a functional area. I mean, I had very, very, very deep experience in organizational development and change and training. So a lot of people who go into HR have one slice that's really, really deep, right? And then depending on whether or not they move up in hierarchy, they either broaden their set of skills and kind of become a leader, and some just stay very specialized. I was very, very deeply specialized in a chunk of people work, and very familiar with the terrain, but I needed to learn a lot about general HR, particularly in the United States, because what I knew was based on Canada, where I was before. So like you said, I kind of went from a general commercial executive to a specific HR executive, and now back to a commercial executive. And that flow has felt natural. It's been a lot of fun. I really loved my time as a people executive. And when I was a people executive, I felt like, hey, I have this commercial sensibility that I want to bring to conversations at the executive level. And sometimes my voice was included, and sometimes it wasn't. And the times when it wasn't, it felt like my voice wasn't included because I was in HR. And that was interesting, maybe frustrating sometimes. And I learned over time, like, how do I still figure out how to be helpful and influential, not just about HR matters or people matters, but how can I contribute as a kind of a general executive? And so a few of my pieces of work along the decade where I was an HR executive, because I had some talent or skills and other things, again, I was just lucky. I was given permission or invited to do other things. Like there was a time where I was sort of interim GM for something. And so in many ways, I feel more like I've gone back to what I was doing over a decade ago, but I don't feel like it's backtracking at all. It's just, I had a 10-year journey as a person who was doing HR, and it was fantastic. And now I'm worrying about a wide range of things on a daily basis. And it feels a little bit more like I've gone back to some of my commercial roots.
Interesting. I'm curious about the point that you made that you felt maybe sometimes you didn't have that voice. Is that aspect, do you think, just because of brand HR? Like what do you think led to that, that default position?
Well, there's a lot of media right now on this topic. There's ongoing conversations about HR in the executive room, the degree to which it's given or denied access. And, it's a hot topic, literally, right now and today, and how difficult that is for people. I would say I was curious sometimes about, I'd be in meetings, it'd be a board meeting, and you'd get to the single slide that the people team had of like at
the back of the deck, a
50-page deck at the very back of the deck. And the single slide would be either one of the two things, either hiring or engagement or both, and you'd beg to get two slides. Like, we want to talk about hiring and engagement, but you still have to have it on one slide. I'm mostly joking, but not all that much. And again, this isn't my experience with all the companies I worked for, but it was always like, hey, you get a little bit of time. And there would be times when there'd be a kind of a general business conversation. Sometimes I felt like I could jump in and include myself, and sometimes I just did not. Diagnosing the why is really tricky. And I'm an older white man. And so I have a huge number of advantages when it comes to being in those rooms, because in a lot of those rooms, quote unquote, particularly with venture capital and boards and et cetera, the majority is older white men, or at least white men. So I'm very, very aware of my core advantage in the situation.
Yeah, and yet you still had that experience, which is interesting.
And I still had that experience. And so given that I still had that experience, and given my professional network of other leaders in HR, I know this is a common experience. Like, it's, you know, and like I said, I have all the advantages. You can throw in other things in terms of privilege too. But I still felt, I don't want to say silence, because I think that's a little bit, I don't think I felt that way. But at times, you know, ignored. And sometimes that, and, you know, and at the times when that happened, how did I reconcile that? I tried to do something that couldn't be ignored, or tried to bring something to the conversation that was not ignorable, because it was that impactful on the business. And sometimes I was successful and sometimes I wasn't.
I remember during my time at Oyster, you were always particularly commercially focused, and I found that very refreshing in contrast with the majority of my experience, not all of my experience, but the majority of it, where I think a lot of the focus we had as a team and as a function was in how we moving the needle on some kind of business result, rather than just, you know, HR for the sake of HR. So you had this arc from CEO to Chief People Officer for a pretty long stint, and then up to COO again. What do you think has that experience made different the next time that you've been in that kind of general management type of role, do you think?
Oh, right. Yeah, that's a great question. I don't want to make presumptions because it's my audience, but there are probably some HR people who found me too commercial and or maybe oddly commercial. For me, people and HR work is just like any other function. It has functional similarities to any function, particularly some of the operational functions like legal and finance. Tends to have a centrality, tends to be a shared services. Like, you can think about all the functional characteristics. And if you're building one, which is what we're doing in startups a lot, that similarity, but type to type to type, should inform the way you think about it, I believe, because what kind of function are we building? What's the services model? How are we going to develop this? And so I think it's really important for HR leaders to be comfortable as functional architects, especially in companies like Oyster particularly was, where we're building the functions from scratch. Like, there's nothing before, and all of a sudden we've got to architect it. So that's similar, and I think that'll always be really important. Somebody on the people team recently said to me something along the lines of, you've stopped speaking as the voice of HR, where before I might have represented what I thought was the voice of the employee to a certain extent. I mean, you never can do that. Anybody who thinks they can do that is smoking something. But I said, well, of course, because it's your guys' job. I don't want to step on your funk. Like, even though I have this deep commitment to HR work and a lot of experience, I think there's an HR function, there's a people function, but then there's being let's say, a human-centric or people-centric executive. Everybody should be a people-centric executive. Like, it's not the CPO's job. This is something I very, very strongly believe. If you're hiring, and I've been interviewed in the past by CEOs, and they've made it very clear that what they want to plug in is a person into the chief people officer job who will be the sole designee of somebody talking as if humans mattered in the company. And,
when it should be something that the entire exec...
It's a terrible way to run a company, frankly.
Yeah.
Like, it's
it's like HR being responsible for culture, right? Like, your score there is an indication of your effectiveness as a function.
No. So there's all sorts of specific areas that HR has there's tools, experience to measure it, to report on it, to help create programs to change it. But same thing, culture and like the human experience. I've been very conscious, shifting back to COO, to try to be that kind of executive that my HR leader feels is being helpful by, in this case, like letting her run her shop, but being an advocate for the kind of human experience we want in the company. And so I'm probably more sensitive to that than I was before my decade as an HR exec, to create room for that leader to contribute in their way.
Yeah, that was going to be the point that I was going to then full circle back to is, how are you conscious from that experience, formatively as a CPO, how are you conscious of making that space? Do you feel that you're conscious of making the space yourself and with other non-HR execs as well in terms of helping them make more space for people, functions and that topic as well?
Yeah, I mean, I try to. I don't want to say I'm always successful, but I try to. What I try to do with the set of leaders that I have reporting to me now is make them good internal customers of the people function, or encourage them to be good internal customers, to have a good, positive relationship. And that means let the people team inform us in the way that their expertise can. You and I have both seen where there's a lot of other functional leaders who think HR does policy enforcement and then is the balloons and soft drinks and party people. The version of what HR can do is so limited and so badly mental modeled that it kind of enforces this really unfortunate dynamic. And so no, let them do their work. They are absolutely crucial professionals. You know them because you manage them. There's incredible analytic minds in the Oyster team. Let them sing. Let them have their room to sing, to inform you, leaders, on your strategies to work with your people. Ultimately, I mean, this is something that I know you've heard me say, like the recruiting team itself doesn't hire anybody. A manager hires somebody. The recruiting team, wonderful enabler, a wonderful teacher, a wonderful quality control. Like it's a great recruiting team, and we have one, and we've always had one here at Oyster. Does great work to sort of sous chef everything and prepare the process and to bring great candidates down the pipeline in all the right ways. But you would never want your recruiting team to deny the hiring manager their choice, because that's not a very effective way to staff a company. The same is true of other systems too. Like the same is true of culture things and a whole bunch of other things
like that, right? Like it's
yeah.
I think so often there's managers. Well, I think it's the duty as well of the HR or the people team to educate. But I think so often there's like this secret menu of services that so many people kind of have an idea of. I ask for one person, one unit of human, and it will show up. And then I ask them to onboard them and train them in how to do their job, and then evaluate that person. But otherwise, HR just does that and the office parties.
Right.
But there's so much beneath that they're clearly very well capable and tooled and able of doing that. Often people have no idea about because they have this concept of HR that just is so out of touch with reality.
Exactly. Whether or not I'm always successful or not, I try to be a good consumer of service, a collaborative consumer of service, and help my leaders be so. And the hardest thing was, at least originally, to step away. And, I think I joke with our VP people, like, there's going to be times when I'm a difficult customer myself. Like there's going to be times where I either want to do it my own way, or whatever, or I disagree with you and the team, but I'll try to be good about that too. Like even when I want to do it my own way, I'm not going to be doing it my own way because I think I'm a better HR professional than you are. I'm doing my own way as an executive who wants to do it my own way, and we can negotiate all that kind of thing. So I am much more aware of all those things. Like when I was a CEO of the firm I managed, we for a long time we didn't have anybody in HR, and then we hired somebody in HR, and I was aware of decisions I was making all the time, but I didn't think of them necessarily as HR decisions. I thought of them as just general management decisions. And what being an HR professional for a good 10 years of my life, I'm much more conscious. I'm much more conscious about inclusivity and sort of letting the people team, have its moments, and letting them professionally inform our direction as a company. In the same, again, at a no greater way, but no less way than other key functional units too.
Yeah, nice. I like it. All right. So changing things up a little bit and heading down the path around compensation. I'm really curious the contrast now, how you think about compensation with your transition. So, what were the key ways in which your role was responsible for and kind of thought about and presented compensation as a chief people officer to now how are you in many respects probably more a consumer of the people functions, thoughts and feelings and processes there. What have been the key things there that have stood out to you?
Yeah. One is just the surface area of the groups and the professionals and the roles that I sit at the top of is just so much larger. So thinking across all of those groups and trying to balance well, not even balance, trying to learn as much as I can about the nuances of those roles. I might have seen them in the past as, I might have always understood for a long time what a particular job did. But I now see what it does in the scope of groups of people and departments and sub-functions that I manage. And so I see the roll-up of output. And so I can think much more concretely and also ultimately represent the value of those roles and those departments, et cetera, to the company at large. And so part of it is just when you, I have roughly 350 people reporting to me. So I take it as my responsibility to be their advocate. And in many cases, people who report to me, vice president level individuals, are the direct advocate, but that doesn't mean when there's C-suite conversations of which I am the rep and we're talking about whether or not to hire a particular role. I need to have enough of a sense of how that role fits into the puzzle to be able to speak to its contributions. And that's different being above it than being to the side. Because when you're a people professional who really deeply understands kind of your functional, like let's say you're an HRBP and you really deeply understand the functional requirements, you're still helping, and you're usually helping another functional leader make that case. Well, now it's me. And so I have to understand it and feel it in my bones a little differently. And I would say I'm very conscious of that. Some of the hardest things to do are rationing exercises of one kind or another. So when you have, let's say for 10 groups of sub-functions, you have only 5 roles in a certain period of time, like in a quarter to hire, or you have 5 roles worth of budget. Where do you even start? Where do you even start to figure out? And what I generally do, and at least works for me, is rather than try to make those decisions in an individualized way, I try to chair a really effective leadership committee, and effectively, which is my reports, and say, hey, everybody, this is what we've got. We have less than we want. We have less than you probably feel you need. So how can we all agree on the right thing for the business? And if I know that my direct reports, which cut across a whole bunch of different functions, all come to agreement about who needs what and why, not always, but 9 times out of 10, it's going to be the right call. Are there cases where I might have to veto? Absolutely. But I think there's a myth that we propagate in business that's sort of the mighty executive myth, where it puts executives up as like sole, and we do it to ourselves. Like we have images of tech leaders who run around making decisions very, very down deep in their organizations all the time. Sometimes probably perfectly fine because they're geniuses. I'm not a genius. And so what I try to do is create commitment through transparency. And so, that's different than advising, right? So to your question, like as an HR executive, I might be brought into the CEO's meeting of their directs and advise. Being it means my authority is ultimately, how can I create a conversation in which this group of very capable leaders can all come to agreement about something as difficult to reconcile as we have only so much budget and it needs to go for the quarter, and we might want more roles if we had more budget, but who needs what? And if they all sit there and we talk it out and they all come to agreement, then they're probably smarter than just me, or at least I feel good that we all have agreed. And
yeah, it makes sense, right? Like agree a set of ground rules, maybe an order of hierarchy of how things like. And again, compensation is such an emotive topic, so I think the more logic and structure you can apply to it, the more people are, even if they disagree with the outcome or are unhappy with it, they can at least, appreciate that there are priorities, and there is never enough to go around. No matter where I've worked, there's never enough to go around in terms of budgeting and things like that. And so certainly not to meet people's expectations. So at least it gives them a sense of, okay, well, I understand how it was applied, and they've kept to that. They've said that, and they've stuck with it. So, okay, let's move on.
Absolutely.
In those sorts of forums and maybe beyond that, how do you think the head of people should show up when it comes to maybe discussing or representing compensation, especially in an executive context? So tell me a bit about that.
That's a great question. Well, I would say here's how I would strive to show up. I don't know if it necessarily is right for everybody in every organization. But one thing I think the people executive can represent and should represent is the compensation philosophy that has been decided upon by the company. Sometimes they are the architect of that philosophy. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're a key contributor. Sometimes they're a sole contributor. Sometimes they're a partial contributor. It doesn't matter. But once it's decided, I think it's a really important role for the head of people to be the person who keeps bringing everybody's eyes and ears back to it. Like this is what we decided are our rules of the road. And if we want to try to compensate fairly, part of fairness is consistency. If we told everybody this is the way we're going to pay, you better pay in accordance to what you've told people. That's I think absolutely the CPO's job. And if necessary, standing up on something and banging something, like whatever it takes to get heard on that adherence to what we've decided is really important. It's very similar to the CFO's role with budgetary matters. Like companies are going to break budgets all the time, right? It's normal. But the CFO is there to say, hey, I need to remind us all that we have this framework that says we got to be between X and Y. Here's how we're agreeing to it. And if we're going to violate that, it's going to hurt us in some case. Same thing, just like a financial budget, the comp philosophy is a commitment, right? It's a commitment to yourselves, but it's also a commitment to especially if you socialize it, which I think you should. If you give it to employees as what they can expect, you've made a promise. So the CPO should be the champion of kind of calling everybody to that. And that's necessary, like holding them, like, look, this is what we said.
Being accountable to it.
That's right. That's right. And that doesn't mean that they might not need to enlist the support of their boss, whether or not CEO or otherwise, to look, I'm trying to hold people to account to this or accountable for it. They're violating it. Like, I need you to step in here. But that's, again, it's the right role. It's like saying, that's my job, is to keep us on this. So I think that's one really important thing.
One of the things I remember fondly is having those conversations, helping defend, be accountable to the document or the philosophy that you've developed. When is it actually that there's a case for change there, though? When is it that it's a case for actually this philosophy is now hindering us, and it's now no longer the point in time to defend it and to ensure accountability, but it's actually about how can we facilitate its evolution to continue to support our business?
Absolutely. So the thing I was going to turn to is the next job of the CPO is to be the person whose job it is to watch for whether or not that's in a failure state. And there's all sorts of ways to watch it's in a failure state. One is external data. Like, is our compensation philosophy aligned or workably commensurate to what we see in the market in terms of competitive stance, data, et cetera? And one is internal. Is our compensation approach leading to engagement or morale problems that we can't afford? It's almost that, they're the owner and they're the role to hold everybody accountable and the executive team to it, but they're also the first person to likely say, I don't think this is working anymore, team. Partly it's that balance because there's no one closer to the data sources than the head of people to come and say, I'm not sure this is working the way we intended anymore. And that requires that constant analytical searching of both internal data and external data on validating. There's going to be times when an employee base likes and doesn't like all of what's in a compensation philosophy. That's important, but it's not the only data source. Is this attracting, retaining talent in the way we want, with the consequences we want? Different companies are going to have very different approaches to compensation. Some companies are okay with annual turnover. A lot of consumer service businesses don't expect to keep people very, very long. And that's fine, but their boundaries of compensation, their philosophy has to match that. And if you want to keep people for an average of 2 to 3 years in highly, highly sought after skill sets like technology workers, you have to design something different.
Yeah, I agree. So this next question I have here is actually a crowdsourced one. One of the ones that I think piqued my interest the most was, how do you, in a startup context, how do you get leaders and founders on board with being more strategic with compensation early in a startup when, even as a head of people or a chief people officer, you've got 10 plates spinning. As a startup, you've got 1,000 plates spinning. when would be the right time? How would you do it in that context?
It's hard for me to think of a time so early where it's not warranted. So like meaning there's practicalities of, is it on the top 3 things to do list when you're 2 people in a startup? No. But if a CEO asks me, when should I start thinking about how I want to pay people here? I'd say, well, aren't you already?
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of times when it's really late in the game, but I don't think there's any time where it's too early. So in a way, answering that question is kind of like, I don't know if I'm going to convince a startup founder to think about their compensation approach when there's like less than 10 hires. But I wouldn't say it would be silly or fruitless. I mean, it's just early because the nature of the problem is all in front of you. Like you could gather all 10 into a room and talk about compensation. Like there's just it's not as practical a problem. But when I think it becomes extremely important is when you begin having a managerial rank in a company. And that managerial rank has to also believe that there's a degree of equitability or fairness of process across a company, because your employees are going to believe that you're fair on the basis of their direct experience of having something done to them or not. And it's, as a startup founder, you can kind of control that by brute force. I've seen founders who are good and generous people still like control the experience of compensation. Compensation, as we know, is like, it's not just a thing you do, it's an experience of something. Like, do I feel well compensated? I can tell somebody they ought to feel they're well compensated until I'm blue in the face, but they have to actually feel well compensated. And that's the rub that all HR people in compensation know. It's like, it's an experience of something. So I've seen founders like handle it themselves up to a certain point and have people be okay because they trust the founder. If they trust the founder, they trust that even if the founder isn't very transparent, they trust that the founder is going to, do it right or do it okay. And sometimes that trust is well placed and sometimes it's not. And then, everybody goes home kind of burned about it. But there's a point when the founders can't possibly do that anymore because they just don't know everybody anymore. So it certainly can't be fair even if they wanted to be fair. And at that point, you start having a managerial rank. And at that point, when you really start having some professional managers between, say, the founding team and line, it's extremely important because otherwise you're going to have this functional pay by function and pay by functional leaders predilections effect, which is really problematic. Because then systemic bias enters in. You have very similar roles paid wildly different things on the basis of the upline executive cherishing or not individuals or the role, or so that's where it's really important, and that happens for different companies at different sizes. But when you look around as an HR professional, you start to see how many people experience their rewards through a manager, not a founder or a C-level. That's when you really
threshold.
I think so.
Yeah, interesting. There's a nice segue there into my next question, which is around performance. So I think the past year in particular, the sentiment across the industry has been that a lot of businesses are tightening their belt. There's obviously been a lot of layoffs in the last few past years. Companies at least saying they're taking a closer look at performance. They're kind of, I think it was Meta we're in this year of efficiency, those sorts of terms flying around. We're past that zero interest rate phenomenon era. For companies that are thinking, okay, how can we use compensation as a lever to drive performance? What are some of the strategies or the practices that they should be looking to? And maybe what are some of the ones that they shouldn't be? Because I think there's been some terrible ones we've heard of as well.
No, well, I mean, it depends. Again, it depends on what kind of company experience you want. But I think you just gain so much by trying to be consistent and clear and as transparent as possible about what you intend to pay for certain jobs. And for the most part, not mucking or fussing around with it, like not bargaining upon entry, and so generally speaking, like just generally speaking, here's the value of X role at this company, and and here's what we can pay, and here is the conditions under which we make that more. And the conditions under which we make that more can be driven by your performance, like you are outdistancing what we thought that role was, and that could be within a banding framework or something else. It could be within a promotion framework. But to be really clear between this is more money because you are exceeding expectations for what we have in that role versus this is more money, which would be a performance-based question. Like, you're doing really well, therefore, we're going to pay you more because either the role itself, you've moved up, you've been progressed, promoted, etc. If you have a banding framework, you make the criteria for performance advancement as absolutely clear as possible. And so you try not to muck together, which I think a lot of companies do. This is more money because the market has shifted in a certain way, or this is more money just because we give more money at this particular time, or because I'm worried that you might leave otherwise, versus we're going to give you more money because the market has shifted and the job is worth more, or we're going to give you more money because your performance has outstripped the expectations of role. And regardless of how you think about those two things, to be really intentional and clear that they're different. Because I think when people don't know, like, I just got more money, I have no idea why. I'm going to take a guess, and I'm going to say at least 80% of workers in our segment, like in the tech segment, often have no idea why they got more money. Not really.
I'd say it's a status quo, right?
Yeah. And they might be happy they got more money. Like, the irony is, I got more money, so I'm not really going to complain. But they don't know why. And that's a real company cultural miss, because then you're not teaching the company about, again, you're not teaching the company about how you compensate, which means even if they got more money, somebody who didn't get more money, and the person who did doesn't even know why, is certainly not going to know why they didn't. And therein lies a lot of the source of compensation problems, and people who are like, nobody knows why they get more money here. And if I didn't get more money, there's no logic at all. So the clearer and the more delineated I think a company can be, the better. I mean, I'm not going to name names, but there's a company not far away from where I am in the States that has said, if you are a distributed worker, you're not eligible for promotions. And so you're not eligible for salary increase, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a way to control a population of people through the thing that hurts them the most, like the ability to earn more money, but kind of in a backhanded way. And so I have to imagine they want to use that as a mechanism to force people to come back into office, because who wants to know that they're capped forevermore, no matter what they do? But why don't you just tell people, if they don't come back into office, they're fired? I mean, it seems like a senselessly...
It's a roundabout sort of incentive.
Companies have to manage performance. I mean, just like sports teams or anybody, like, people are going to make the team, they're going to get cut from the team. I mean, we are professionals. As professionals, we have to understand that when we consistently can't perform to our job, we ought to expect that we are fairly asked to leave. So, in the business environment, that's something that's going to happen, but just do it straight up. Like, do it straight up. Don't use compensation maneuvers to try to get people to leave kind of underhandedly. I mean, I'm sure that, listeners might say, like, when you're a great big company, it's just hard. You got to deal with the press, and you got, so they're moving the dials.
Well, they're dealing with the press anyway, aren't they?
Right, exactly.
They're being written about poorly because of these.
Somebody always comes out and says something that makes it look problematic anyway. So the more that you can use these tools, like from performance to comp policies, to be positively instructive, and then when you have to be clear why something isn't going to work. And just clarity is your friend. I mean, I think clarity and transparency are your friends in virtually every situation I can think of.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think, like I said, the norm in my experience has always been that people come into a company with an expectation of at least an annual review and an increase of whatever that may constitute, but they've got no idea. They've come from environments where they go, well, I just get 3 or 4 or 5 or 10% a year, and I've never known why it just has operated that way. And so, especially if you're in an environment where you're maybe not offering that pay increase on an annual basis anymore because the market's shifted, business results, etc., you have to be really crystal clear why, because you have to offset that expectation that people have come to your company with. And so using clear language around what constitutes a pay increase or what someone's pay increase is constituted by is critical to help them understand.
humans, and we have complex experiences of fairness and equitability. Two of my three kids are now, one just turned 13, the other's 10. And they remind me, I think weekly, daily, like it so quickly, they go to a place assuming inequitability of treatment.
Yeah.
And part of it is the overriding desire that a lot of us have to feel treated equally. It seems to be human for good reason. So a lot of people have lived their professional lives going company to company and generally experiencing either, in some cases, outright lack of fairness, but minimally in many cases, they don't experience a clarity of performance, rewards. They don't experience a clarity of it, so they end up suspecting that HR or HR plus executive teams are deliberately trying to pull a wool over their eyes. And sometimes that is true, unfortunately. Oftentimes it's not actually true, but since there isn't enough outright clarity and information shared, it's easy for people to fall back on,
people
on our primal nature. Like, I suspect you're trying to screw me over because you haven't given me any reason to suspect otherwise.
Yeah. Tragic, isn't it?
It is kind of tragic.
But a reality we need to...
But it's a reality, and to not make it tragedy, it just takes constant vigilance and a courage to tell people why they're being paid what they're being paid. And also why they're not being paid what they might think they're being paid.
We've kind of talked around the topic of actually speaking about pay. And I think one of the hardest things companies and the companies face is helping their managers speak about pay, empowering them to speak about pay, rather than maybe those conversations being funneled back to the people team. What are some ways that you think are really effective in terms of empowering leaders to have those conversations, really confidently discuss compensation with their teams?
So part of it is just making sure that the leaders understand the frameworks to start. If we think about compensation framework, compensation philosophy, when you're designing it, be inclusive, use good design procedure to invite. In some ways, like it isn't necessarily to the benefit of the HR leader to go and scurry away in a back room, create the compensation policy and emerge with it. Even if it's greenlit by, say, the CEO, the other executives, like you haven't sold them on it, right? And so even when the HR leadership is charged with creating the document, good design practices involve your other stakeholders because they have to represent this with you to a certain extent. So part of it is involvement in the tenets of the compensation approach in the beginning, because otherwise you get the very common, all too common, like, I don't know, but just HR wants to do it this way. It's this so easy, grenade lob. And it's like, well, if they signed up, like, and signed literally or figuratively the comp approach, then, our leader can go back, hold on a second, don't lob me that grenade. Like, you agreed to this or wanted it or asked for it this way, or like you're totally a collaborator. And so I can understand if you don't want to deal with the tough stuff, I can train you better to do that, but don't lob it as if it's my message only, right? That's one thing, is that if the other leaders don't feel that they have a stake in the creation of the approach, you're going to get the grenades lobbed a lot. So
it's all too easy, isn't it? It's
all too easy. Now, if you've dealt with that and people other leaders feel a degree of commitment, I'm always reluctant to say it's a matter of training, but in this case, I do think it's a matter of training. It's a matter of training people in making compensation conversations okay, not uncomfortable, to feel that leaders can refer to the compensation approach themselves without dragging in HR all the time. And that's a matter of good, clear communication, but also some skill. There's a remarkable number of managers who don't even feel comfortable giving people more money, like telling somebody you've just gotten a raise. Because money is a hard thing to talk about, and some
loaded topic.
There's loaded topic. There's cultural differences where it's easy, it's harder in some cultures. Managers controlling access to money is a huge part of the power of being a manager, and that can weigh on you in all sorts of ways, good, bad, both.
Yeah.
So helping people feel like they're equipped with rubrics to just say, like, this is why you're paid what you're paid. This is why, and that they can point to it. Like, this isn't just me making it up. This is what we here at the company.
Logic.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. None of the conversations I've had have been more challenging than I think going into one of those things, thinking you're giving someone a great pay outcome, and to find that actually it just didn't align with their expectations.
No, exactly.
And I think being able to speak to that underlying basis as a fallback if they aren't, if they don't just go, oh, that's great, thanks so much, I appreciate it, which is probably what feeds into some of the hesitation, because no doubt many managers have had that where they've thought, hey, this is a great pay increase relative to others that I'm giving to you. But that recipient has then gone, well, actually, it's still way below what I expected.
Right. And that's going to be a hard conversation, but at least you're not out on a high wire act as a manager having no basis. And again, you get a certain budget as a manager, you allocate X to a person for a pay increase. When you communicate that, you expect the person to be overjoyed. They are very disappointed. If you have no sense of how the compensation cycle was budgeted, handled, made,
you're not equipped.
You're not really out there on your own. And so the likelihood of you stumbling or making something up that isn't even true or helpful is really high. So as an HR leader, it's something you can really advocate for. Like, let's equip the managers with enough information about what we are doing so that, so that they're empowered, but B, so they don't throw anybody under the bus, much less us as the HR team.
It's actually, I found a good argument for when having the conversation about pay transparency within the organization is actually, this is like, I may want it for ethical and moral reasons, but actually it will make your life easier because before you even go to have that conversation, people kind of have an expectation and understanding of what they're likely to get. And so it prefaces it before you get there.
Well, it also does a remarkable thing, which it means that there's no information power gap between, the manager and the employee. And so when a manager says kind of with a sly smile, like, this is a really good increase, and you don't know whether or not it is or not as an employee, like, you have to either believe it, doubt it, but the likelihood of not being entirely sure and operating with a little bit of a funny story in your head is much higher. So it's better, frankly, if the employees don't have to trust that the manager is telling them the truth. They know that the manager is telling them the truth.
Yeah.
It takes off the table. And of course, the managers and the managerial structure still have the authority to decide what the person gets. But what is there out in the open for everybody to see, is the standards. And so there isn't this distrust of the process. Again, even if the result is not what the person wants.
This has been really insightful. We've touched on a range of different topics, but I'm conscious there may be final tips or final words from yourself in terms of helping heads of people that are maybe looking to implement more robust pay practices. Any parting words, final tips before we close this out?
Yeah, I compensation has been an area that I've loved for a long time, and there's
very few of them.
There's either you love compensation work or you probably really, really don't. Why do I love it? I love it because it has a strong ethical dimension, and you have to really think about what you're trying to do culturally, in thinking about how you architect the policies, how you communicate the policies, how you train the policies. And you'd probably be in the wrong businesses if, as a compensation professional, you want everyone to be pleased with their outcome. That is not a good gauge for success. But there is a sense in which I have always tried to operate with a high degree of let the transparency serve the interests of the ethics. Show your work. If people are going to disagree with how a company is rewarding people, which is a fundamental, company to human engagement, what do I get paid to do this job? People may not like the salary you're offering. They might not like the increase that you've given them. But if you're really clear and transparent and share the information about how you pay, what you pay, at least you're taking away the criticism of this is a great big capitalist enterprise that depends upon information control. Don't tell anybody any of what we're doing, so that they never know whether or not this is good, bad, or indifferent. I don't want to have people experience it that way. So I think people will put in more of their self in an environment where they feel that there's fairness of process. It doesn't mean you're going to keep everybody all the time. There's going to be people who I can earn more money, and it's you can.
Yeah.
If that's
there's
the
always
most
someone
important,
that pays more.
Yeah, if that's really important for you and you have that other offer that pays you more, but with my blessing, go take it. But I don't want anybody to ever choose to be somewhere because you've hoodwinked them. And that's just ethics. And so why do I love being in compensation? And what's the tip is lean in to the moral reasons of why compensation is important so that, you can kind of find your center as a compensation professional. And it's not going to make it any easier, but it means that when you execute it right, there's a sense of satisfaction of seeing something done in a way that you think is humanly responsible.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I think it's a critical aspect, and I think it makes it incredibly hard when you're potentially in environments where you're forced to operate, counter to that. It's really challenging. So it creates a good rub. Amazing. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
Yeah, there's been so many nuggets of wisdom in this. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Foundation series. Stay ahead in startup compensation by subscribing and joining our community of startup leaders. Until next time, I'm Matt from Foundation.